World of Warfare presents
Big Friends of World War II. Known as Big Friends by World War II Allied fighter pilots, the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator became the primary warbirds that ultimately bombed Germany into submission, at the same time destroying many major German cities, leading to the destruction of 3.6 million dwellings, as well as the deaths of an estimated 300,000 German civilians. During the course of the war, the B-17 underwent near continual improvements and remodeling. However, the fundamentals of the plane ensured that she would go down in history as one of the vital workhorses in the Allies' war effort against Axis. Anticipating the need for a steady and growing supply of flying fortresses, the Army Air Corps implemented an open production pool policy in the summer of 1941, just months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The mandate effectively combined the manufacturing clout of the Douglas Aircraft Company, Boeing, and the Vega Aircraft Company, wherein the companies jointly produced versions of the Flying Fortress with only minor variations in design and detail. During the peak years of production, each B-17 employed 18 self-sealing Tokyo tanks, 9 per wing, which could carry a total of 2,780 gallons of high-octane gasoline, nearly a quarter of the plane's maximum takeoff weight of 48,726 pounds. Minus aircrew, fuel, and payload, a naked Flying Fortress weighed in at a staggering 33,279 pounds. It could cruise at 200 miles an hour, carry 5,000 pounds of bombs, and had a range of 2,000 miles, all within a service ceiling of 37,500 feet. By May of 1945, 12,726 B-17s had rolled off American production lines at a cost of $238,329 per plane in 1945 dollars, which equates to $4.2 million in today's currency. Once inside the plane, several feet in front of the waist gunner's position was the hydraulically operated ball turret or belly turret, which was made up of a plexiglass globe some 30 inches in diameter. When the entry hatch was open, the two 50 caliber machine guns flew in a barrel-down configuration, but once the ball gunner had slipped into his translucent cocoon, his machine guns were positioned on either side of his legs. When in combat, he sighted over the tops of his knees, his turret so cramped that his parachute hung from a hook on the fuselage wall near the escape hatch. Continuing forward in the cigar tube was the bulkhead door that led to the radio room, the only sealed compartment in the plane. The radio operator sat at a desk that faced the front of the plane, while above his head was a single handheld 50 caliber machine gun, which pointed toward the rear of the plane. In later models of the B-17, after the advent of Pathfinder radar, the radar navigator sat just forward of the radio operator. Behind the flight deck or cockpit stood the hydraulic housing for the top turret, replete with two hard-mounted 50 caliber machine guns that could swivel nearly 360 degrees, save for two limiter stops that precluded the engineer gunner from shooting off the tail of his own plane during the heat of battle. When not firing the top turret or looking after the mechanical health of his ship, the engineer stood behind the pilot and co-pilot, monitoring the gauges relating to all four of the bomber's 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney Hornet radial engines. High and forward stood the cockpit bridge, where the pilot and co-pilot were responsible for keeping the giant ship aloft and in tight formation as they approached the initial point, or IP, of a bomb run. Major General David N.W. Grant, one of the air surgeons who oversaw the health of Army Air Corps airmen, explained the working conditions for B-17 pilots and flight crews alike. One look into the pilot cabin of a B-17 will convince you that its flight is actually an engineering operation demanding manual and mental skills, which puts the driving of an automobile in the kiddie car class. The compartment is lined front, side, ceiling, and parts of the floor with controls, switches, levers, dials, and gauges. I once counted around 130. The coordinated operations of all gadgets would be difficult in the swivel chair comfort of your office. Reduce the size of your office to a 5-foot cube, engulf it in the roar of 1,200 horsepower engines, increase your height to around 4 to 5 miles. Then get into a flying suit, gloves, and shoes, all heated by electricity. Put on a helmet with earphones, cover your eyes with goggles, and the rest of your face with an oxygen mask containing a microphone. Strap on your parachute, and it might be well to add about 16 pounds of body armor. As a final touch to this bizarre picture of intense concentration, add the fear of death. In front and below the navigator station was the bombardier station, which also had the dubious distinction as being the most dangerously exposed position in the plane. During a bomb run, he hovered over his Norton bomb site, calculating airspeed and altitude and wind drift to determine when precisely to salvo the bombs. As his ship approached the target, the bombardier took control of the aircraft, giving him full reign over when and where to drop the ship's payload. Every heavy bomber was equipped with one of Carl Norden's $10,000 bomb sights, and when an Army Air Force leader first challenged Norton about the inventor's claim that he could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet, Norton replied, "Which pickle would you like to hit?" In reality, however, the Norton bomb sight was difficult to operate in actual combat conditions. Clouds over industrial targets and enemy marshalling yards frequently obscured the bombardier's view. On clear days, however, when the enemy could accurately deliver an effective barrage of anti-aircraft fire, bombardiers were under siege from flak attacks, attempting to obliterate his glass-enclosed workstation. Despite the risk of instant death, a bombardier stayed at his station, entering data into his bomb sight, including ground speed, rate of closure, wind drift, and estimated air resistance. As for the B-24 Liberator, the second big friend could carry a larger bomb capacity than the B-17, flew marginally faster, yet had a significantly longer range of 3,200 miles versus 2,000 for the Flying Fortress. The B-24's service ceiling was 28,000 feet, employing 4 Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp engines. By the end of the war, 18,481 had rolled out of 5 stateside manufacturing plants maintained by 4 different companies at a unit cost of $215,516 in 1945 currency, or $3.8 million in today's currency. Consolidated, along with North American Aviation, Douglas Aircraft Company, and the Ford Motor Company, became known as the Liberator Production Pool, and together they produced approximately 5,000 more planes than were produced by Flying Fortress manufacturers. Even to this day, the B-24 Liberator holds the record as the most widely produced multi-engine heavy bomber in aviation history. At Ford's massive Willow Run facility near Ann Arbor, at peak wartime production, the plant turned out a Liberator every 15 minutes, while Consolidated San Diego Aircraft Production Plant No. 2 produced 162 Liberators a week, or nearly 1 an hour, a feat which ultimately allowed the Army Air Corps to gain air supremacy over the Luftwaffe by the summer of 1944. No one knows the author of the poem, The Unsung Hero's Lament, but it first came to light when the 484th Bomb Group was training in Kansas before they joined up with the 15th Air Force in Italy. The poem is about a B-24 pilot who must detail his qualifications for entry into the Heavenly Hall of Fame, explaining his exploits to the likes of Julius Caesar and Ulysses S. Grant. For there's a sort of maniac madness in the supercharger's whine, as you hear the ice cubes tingling in the turbo balance line, and the runway strips are narrow, but the snowbanks they are wide, while the crash trucks say in a mournful way, "You're on your final ride." The nose gear rocks and trembles, right held with baling wire, and the wings are filled with thermite to make a hotter fire. The camouflage is peeling off. It lends an added luster, while pilot heads are filled with lead to help the load adjuster. The bomb bay doors are rusted, and close with a ghastly shriek, and the plexiglass is smeared with some forgotten oil leak. The oleo struts are twisted, and the wheels are not quite round, and the bulkheads thin, Ford builds with tin, admit the slightest sound. You taxi out on the runway, mid groans of tortured gear, and you feel the check writer's practiced teeth gnawing your tender rear. The co-pilot sitting on the right, in a liquor-laden coma, mingles his breath like the kiss of death with the putt-putt's foul aroma. So it's off in the overcast yonder, though number 1 is missing, and the hydraulic fluid escaping sets up a gentle hissing. The compass dial is spinning in a way that broods no stopping, and row by row the fuses blow with an intermittent popping. Little appreciation has been given to the conditions airmen endured in both the B-17 and the B-24. Temperatures at 23,000 feet reached minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit in winter, while summer temperatures dropped to a balmy minus 40 to 50 degrees. Waist gunners stood before open windows in these temperatures, and when the bomb bay doors were open, the entire crew shivered in the frigid air. Crew members wore electrically heated suits, gloves, and slippers, which had a routine habit of shocking men in their crotch and in their hands. The noise in both big friends was deafening, which added a surreal element when the airmen were under attack from silent flak blossoms shot up from the ground or muted cannon fire from enemy fighters. Comparisons between the B-17 and the B-24 became inevitable as more and more aircrews saw action. While Fortress crews called Liberators the crate that carried the B-17 into Europe, Liberator crews called the Fortress the Hollywood bomber, primarily because Hollywood heartthrob Clark Gable had piloted one in the 1938 film Test Pilot. Despite these differences in heavy bomber equipment, aircrews of both B-17s and B-24s shared one ritual that always kept them on the same team. Airmen searched the interiors of newly arriving aircraft, scouring each plane for penciled notes written by female workers back home. Rosie the Riveters, as they became known, would scribble their names, addresses, and even their bra sizes, which helped homesick men remember what they were fighting for. It sure worked because a lot of guys wrote to them, recalled one flyer. To this day, I don't know if any marriages occurred, but there were lots of letters anyhow. Bombing Axis countries without escort fighters proved to be an early and quite harrowing bloodbath for 8th Airmen, deeply challenging morale, commitment, and the legitimacy of daylight strategic bombing. In the first 10 months of her existence, the 8th Air Force, flying out of numerous air bases in the United Kingdom, lost 188 Liberators and flying fortresses, costing 1,900 crewmen their lives. Roughly 73% of the airmen who arrived into Great Britain in the summer and fall of 1942 would not complete their tour of duty, which at the time was set at 25 missions completed. 57% were either killed or missing in action, while another 16% were killed or wounded in crashes in Great Britain, or permanently grounded by physical or emotional disability. By war's end, the 8th Air Force had suffered more than 26,000 fatal casualties, approximately 1,500 more lives than were lost by the U.S. Marine Corps over the course of World War II. In a few short months of war, the pre-war doctrinal concept of the self-defending heavy bomber had swiftly been reduced to a costly, blood-soaked fiction. Losses continued to mount unabated, and on August 17, 1943, 60 bombers went down in attacks on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, representing an unsustainable loss rate of 16%. In October, the 8th sustained a 20% loss rate during what airmen soon referred to as Schweinfurt II, which at the time made it statistically impossible for an airman to complete its 25 missions. If daylight bombing was to continue her early yet unconvincing start, then the Army Air Corps needed a way to reduce her abysmal attrition rates. Nearing the end of the first disastrous year of combat, in December of 1942, the 8th began to cobble together solutions to the issue of long-range fighter escort coverage. Aircraft manufacturers redesigned 3 fighter aircraft with enlarged internal fuel capacities, while the arrival in late 1943 of the P-51 Mustang proved to be a game changer in terms of superior fighter performance and escort range. Regarding ongoing bomber vulnerabilities, at the beginning of 1943, 8th Air Force Commanding General Ira Eaker proposed the addition of a machine gun-equipped nose turret after the Luftwaffe began focusing their attacks on the unprotected forward quarter of B-24s and B-17s. That same month, Brigadier General Haywood S. Hansell suggested that until nose turrets could be added to the heavy bomber fleet, fighters should position themselves in front of bomber formations in an effort to thwart German frontal attacks. Heavy losses within the 8th Air Force continued unabated until Eaker and the other air leaders finally discounted and reversed the erroneous pre-war air doctrine that left the Army Air Corps completely unprepared for long-range fighter escorts capable of shadowing bomber streams during their full inbound and exit flights over enemy-held territory, making the big friends of World War II a vital instrument of Allied victory.